This is Big Man Tyrone, and you're about to watch the MtG Cabal cast with your hosts, Woad, Thirsty, and Reptar. Sub to us on all your podcast networks at MtG Cabal Cast and YouTube.
All right. Hey, guys. Welcome to the newest episode of the Cabal Cast, episode 102, nearly hitting our 2-year mark. This week, it's been kind of a downtime. Obviously, we had an absurd B&R where Standard got nuked except for Embercleave. Free shout-out. Pick that card up. So we're going to be discussing some non-standard formats, some formats that don't get nuked every 1, 2, or 3 weeks, it seems like.
Yep.
We're going to be talking about basically what's been going on with Pioneer and Modern. Especially, we obviously have Eternal Weekend coming on Moto, so Legacy Vintage we'll touch on a little bit later, but for now we want to focus on kind of what used to be bread and butter for LGSs and is shifting online and how that's shaping up financially and everything.
Yep.
So, Pioneer and Modern.
Yes, sir. So for a while, Modern was basically cock of the walk. It was the most popular format in paper and on Moto, and then we lost paper play, and it maintained that lead on Moto until Pioneer came in and burned really brightly through a number of bannings into a stall out, essentially.
Boy.
Once the paper events were officially ditched, and WotC seems to cast their gaze elsewhere for format maintenance. So Pioneer stalls out, and Modern continues to climb, and we talk about Modern a lot on this cast in that time period, and we were looking at some decks that kind of came up in the interim, citing Ad Nauseam because of Thassa's Oracle, and that kind of rejuvenated some odds and ends in Modern and put some eyes back on that in the in-between as well. We also got Jumpstart, which went straight into Historic on Arena and royally screwed some things there with Muxus, although that format has finally been rebalanced. And so we kind of come back around to Pioneer now, having seen a number of bans and unbans from the summer, and it seems like the format is finally being revisited by players. It didn't really need any more intervention from WotC outside from some work in Q3 this year. But players are coming back because it looks like the format has basically stopped its tailspin of the same, 3 to 5 decks. And so what brought about this topic really was we noticed that on MTG decks, where it's a lot easier to kind of sort out events, that Pioneer events are firing basically at the same rate that Modern events are, if you discount all the unique F&M style events that are being held by companies that aren't Haruruya. Modern just shotguns events, but they're all these unique LGS level events, and that's awesome because it makes the format look super popular, and it's great because it keeps people interested. But at the same time, Pioneer doesn't get that much exposure because people aren't holding these events. What we are looking at instead aren't just the leagues, which are constantly firing for Pioneer and Modern, but the number of people in the challenges, which are capping at 32 for Pioneer and Modern.
Yep.
And the prelims, which are actually seeing the same amount of players or more compared to Modern.
Yeah.
Over the last month or so. That's what actually brought us around to this topic, was looking at WotC-sponsored events, how often they were firing, if they were capping, and what the average attendance was. And if you take a look at this for September, you will see that Pioneer's firing basically the same number of WotC-sponsored events with the same or better attendance than Modern right now.
Yeah. And I think part of this kind of does go back to, like you said, format maintenance, and the fact that the lack of format maintenance for these two has gone in opposite directions. Because in one instance of Modern, it's just stupid. It's allowed a lot of strategies to go on unchecked. You've got Uro out of control when you don't have the same control cards that you do in like Legacy or something that can help with the power level. And it's a lot more of an unfair metagame. And when unfair metagames go unchecked, it actually becomes very unfun. It's, Vintage, despite what anybody thinks, is a pretty fair format. So that going unchecked is a different story. And Pioneer is very much a fair format. that has gone unchecked. And while new sets have come out and new cards have entered, they haven't had the synergies that they have in Modern that's allowed the Modern metagame to become a little bit more degenerate. Whereas Pioneer, it's still, you've got Lotus Combo, you've got Omnath, whatever. But by and large, it's a fair format.
Yes.
And I think that it's interesting to see that while Standard has been absolutely out of control, Modern has been absolutely out of control, Legacy and Vintage were abandoned, people started kind of flocking to this fair field, so to speak.
Yes.
Of Auras and Niv-to-Light and Mono Black Aggro and, humans or Mono White Aggro, whatever you want to call it. And you still have decks like Gruul Midrange stomping around too that people play. And it's, while everything's been going on, it's interesting to me that that's been where people have gravitated towards these fair strategies that seem to be what Wizards is placing an emphasis on.
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, what we saw was in back-to-back months, July and August, some format cleanup for Pioneer. WotC brought back Oath of Nissa. They unbanned that in July, and they let the following cards run roughshod over the format after Oath was unbanned until August. Inverter of Truths, Kethis, the Hidden Hand, Underworld Breach, and Walking Ballista. All 4 of those cards were then banned in August. Of the top 7 decks, those cards were in 3 of the 7. After that, what we saw was the decks on the outside of those 7, the control and the mid-range decks, actually do come back, and the aggro strategies do change. The premier aggro decks, while Mono Black still maintains its kind of, its role as top shot for aggressive decks, we are seeing, like you mentioned, the Gruul aggro deck that is currently tearing it up. We are seeing black-white humans. We are seeing goblins or mono-red aggro, however you want to look at that deck. All are now able to flourish. Azure Control, which was there, can actually be a top 10 deck instead of looking from the outside looking in.
Outside looking in, yeah.
Yeah, and they basically just took care of some of the degeneracy in the format that allowed, or it pushed the format too far. And the way I phrase this is that when they cut all those cards loose, when they cut Inverter loose and they cut Walking Ballista loose, the rest of the format was able to catch up. But in reality, the format just kind of slowed down enough so that all those other strategies become good enough. Inverter wasn't necessarily a combo deck. It has a combo finish, but it is, or was rather, at its heart, blue-black control with an inevitable end. You just inverted somebody out or Jace somebody out or Thassa's Oracle somebody out. The deck wasn't dedicated to the combo. It was dedicated to holding control of the game and then eventually winning with Inverter game 1. And in games 2 and 3, you could swap over to a Pack Rat plan and just value somebody out with Pack Rats. That's not really a combo deck. A dedicated combo deck can't just switch gears like that unless you're changing from Belcher to Doomsday or something. Some weird shift like that, and you'd have to dedicate all your slots to do that. So this just allowed the rest of the format to just kind of blossom, and now we're seeing, all pillars of the format take root.
Yeah.
And I think it's super important that WotC finally came back to groom this format instead of just letting it wither and die like we thought it was going to for the majority of the summer.
We said that multiple times on the cast, that it seemed that was the way it was going to. And for whether by design or not, they actually have one of the only healthy metagames that's widely played where you have aggro, you have mid-range, you have control, you have combo, like you said. Gutting those cards to the format allowed the other pillars to catch up. Mm-hmm. And it allowed us to see, not just like a rock, paper, metagame, deck A, C beats B, so on and so forth. And it's been really nice to see because it has financially been really good for the format, because it reminds me of, when you look at the cost of Pioneer decks compared to like Modern or something, it harkens back to original RTR Standard, where there were so many viable archetypes in the format, it helped suppress prices.
Yeah.
And some of these cards, sure, they're going to carry a price. Omnath, until it's banned across every format in Magic, is going to carry a price. Uro, until it's banned in every format in Magic, is going to carry a price. More on that later. And, but aside from that, the format staples are also ubiquitous that, there's such a wide breadth of them that it does suppress prices.
Yeah.
It's not an instance where you need, you're playing black in the format, you need 3 Lily of the Veil. You're playing a lands deck, you need 4 Mox Diamonds. There's so many different archetypes within, aggro, within control, that it does diversify the price of these singles. So you're seeing an affordable paper format, which has more, and it's a non-rotating format. Sure, whatever.
Yeah, why not?
I'll take it.
Yeah, it allows you to buy into your deck or your theme and stick with those cards for a while, and you're not going to lose out because it's non-rotating and it's very easy or cheap to get into depending on what you're playing. Taking a look at just meta share on mtgdex.net, mono black. The average mono black deck costs $320. The most expensive deck on the list is 5-color Niv Mizzet, but if I'm not mistaken, it's because it's running 3 Uro. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the land base for that, because it's just shocks all the way down, right? That withstanding, the rest of this format is pretty cheap and pretty easy to get into, but while nobody's playing it, these prices are further suppressed. And this brings us to why this is important, and it's because if players are revisiting this format and there's renewed interest from the player end, that means there's going to be renewed interest on the vendor end as well. So instead of just pushing away your Pioneer stock or shifting things that should or might see Pioneer play to bulk because the format was essentially rotting on the vine, renewed interest in this format means a renewed view from a speculatory standpoint. So along with players, if you want to finance on this format, you've got to start paying attention again to this format. All the cards that we looked at previously that were picks, in the past year for this format are all live again. This is the mono red deck playing the mono red God from Amonkhet again. No, it's not playing Hazoret. Not yet. It absolutely could. That card is pretty good with Embercleave. Pretty
and that's the
good
thing, too,
Embercleave.
is that not having these paper events does in some ways harm innovation in these decks. So targeting something like a Hazoret that does go pretty good, like you said, with Embercleave, shout out to Larry David, is huge. And we may start to see that because when you get to the pro level and you've got everyone, the day before we're on Bridgevine for Modern, let's do it. And it hasn't broken out until then. These are the types of things you see.
Yes.
And, the mono red deck is pretty static and has been for a while as far as the online meta goes. Well, once we get paper, we may see Embercleave there. And I think that, these picks being live again, your Bone Crusher Giants, stuff like that we'd mentioned in the past, all of a sudden, you may have dumped them in a box like I did because you were like, maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't.
Yep.
Maybe it'll happen is a lot more likely now.
Yes.
Than it was 6 months ago.
Yeah. Pioneer was I think it was Modern was going to be the premier level format for the Mythic Championships that they had to ditch, and that became historic. But Star City was supporting Pioneer, and I think there were going to be some Pioneer paper events. So as long as the player base is there and supporting this format on Moto, there still exists the opportunity that these events come back in paper once we get paper Magic back. So this just compounds why you need to go back and start looking at this format again, even if it's just to track what you have sitting around. If you've forgotten about it, start looking at it again. With the bannings and the way things work, who knows what you have in your backstock. It might be worth cashing out now as vendors move back in and people, like I said, are looking to this format again. There's going to come a point in time where somewhere on this planet people are going to be able to play paper Magic fairly reliably, and this could be that format. And thus you begin to have your finance drivers, and it is very important that you understand and keep tabs on this, especially because this is kind of meant to take over modern spot. So anything that rotates out of standard immediately falls into the trap of Pioneer. And if this is going to be something you want to care about, no better time than now to start renewing your own interest in this format as a collector, as a player, and start taking advantage of the resources out there between MTG Dex and MTG Meta. I think Goldfish has some stuff going on there too. Like, these aggregate sites are where you're going to need to go to take a look at this. There's some champions on Twitter. I think Todd Anderson, Ryan Overturf are still playing the format pretty heavily. These are people you need to follow, these content creators that are going to basically be driving these events from now on until we get to something like you mentioned, Eternal Weekend, where I think they're just going to be running any event that anybody wants that isn't one of the premier events, i.e. Legacy and Vintage. They're just going to fire via Discord. I think that's the plan.
Yeah.
And
I think that getting ahead of these, like we've always said on this cast, having your curated network of information is important, and especially on something like this, because it is, as we touched on, such a unique time in Magic where we don't have paper events, so that liquidity and that financial viability isn't necessarily there now. We may be getting to that point soon, and if it's any time within the next couple months and this Pioneer trend continues, that's going to be a huge opportunity for some of these decks to go from a couple $100 to $600 or $700, just because of the increased exposure and the increased playability of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the unique thing about the hobby, is it's all tied to playability. And right now, unless it's EDH, not super playable. But if you pay attention to the metagames and you see what's shifting, you can get in on something like a Lotus Field deck now, knowing that, well, it's incredibly good online, and a playset of Lotus Fields is like $15, when a year ago it was $15 for a Lotus Field.
Yeah.
There's no reason we couldn't get back to $15 per Lotus Field.
Absolutely.
If this continues.
Absolutely, yeah. And at that point, Lotus Breach wasn't even the best deck in the format. It was one of the best decks in the format. It had a really rough inverter matchup. It did lose Underworld Breach, but it did pick up that 7 CMC sorcery from M21.
Peer into the Abyss.
Yes, Peer into the Abyss, where you basically just draw half your library and lose half your life and combo out from there, and you play Omniscience out of the sideboard as well to just combo out. Like, the deck has been kind of reconfigured, but it still has to compete with some incredibly fast aggro decks that'll just clock you on 4. That's it. And just to tie it all back, with Pioneer coming back, this renews our specs. Personally, this renews our specs in the cast, and because Pioneer's been down for so long, we wanted to make sure that everybody who follows us, who through our Discord, Twitter, etc., knows that we're going to start looking back to Pioneer now, because players are caring, vendors are caring, you should care.
Yep.
So
that's how it works.
Yep. So
Picks, I have a great one for Pioneer.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I've been wondering about this card for a while, and I wanted to say something on Twitter, because this is a card that boggles my mind. And bothers me at the same time, so I'm glad you picked it. So I can just grumble at you this entire time. So you can go first.
The roles are reversed for once.
Yeah.
So my pick this week, as I mentioned before, we'd have more on Uro later. So, Uro. Here's the thing. The card didn't really get affected by the ban financially. It's probably not going to, because it's still incredibly playable in EDH. It's still incredibly playable in Modern. It's still an incredibly playable good card. That's just a fact. The thing is, the formats that it's best in are not being played right now in paper. Formats like Pioneer, where this card can be a rock star. Formats like Legacy, where the card is as ubiquitous as Oko almost at this point. It's pretty bad.
They go close to hand in hand.
And when those events come back, and I do think it is a matter of when, not if, the $30 price tag that this card carries is not going to be sufficient. Like it will be back up to $50, I would expect, back to what it was in standard. And it will always have an absurd amount of EDH playability. So, while we haven't seen it currently, I think we could see it retreat about $4 to $5 tops. I know it's not great when it's already 30, but I think if you can pick this up in a trade for some stuff that you picked up at 60 to 70% straight across for an Uro, that seems great to me. It's going to be hard to lose on that, I would think, because the card is an absolute house and it is not going anywhere.
No.
It shouldn't be banned in Legacy. It shouldn't be banned in Vintage. It's never going to get banned in EDH, and the card is insane in all of those formats.
Yep.
Pioneer, I think it's great. Who knows if it's going to get banned or not? At one point, everyone thought it should be, and the metagame adapted. Yep. Hallelujah. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
But I think that this card easily has, within the next 6 months, a $50 price tag. So I think for right now, the chance of retail almost doubling over the next 6 months is a pretty good spot to get in at. Yep. So if you can get it for $25 in trade, $30 in trade, great, pick it up. There's no reason not to. If you pay 20 to 25 cash, I also think that's fine. It's a little bit shorter window than some of my other picks because it is 6 months, and we're the low point was in January this year or January last year. No, this year. Yeah, this year. Sorry. And it hasn't really gone down much. You can take a look at the graph, and since, let's see, September 27th, it was back down to $26 low. It's only gone up since and held steady at about $33.
Yep.
So price point is a little bit higher end, but it's a quick turnaround, I think. And I just think it's a solid pickup overall.
Yeah, the reason I grumble about this card is because it's done nothing but go up essentially since the banning, with no real paper Magic being played outside of EDH. And I honestly didn't think that EDH was going to push this card back up towards 50 alone, let alone float it this entire time. So.
Yeah. I think the fact that it's floated it is one of the reasons that I was so ready to pick it.
Yep.
Because if it's being floated this way because of paper EDH, then when Pioneer comes back, when paper events come back, I think it's almost a sure thing that this will hit the $50 point. And I think it's just a matter of literally WotC posting, hey, paper Magic's a thing again, and all of a sudden all this stuff explodes.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. So, and I like the defense of it that way because, like I said, in my mind, it just didn't make sense. But because I was just looking at it through the lens of, well, where is this played that I understand currently in paper? And it just came back to EDH. It wasn't thinking back to Legacy, Modern, and Pioneer, where it's still legal in these formats and still highly viable across the board there. That it's going to see some float from players that bought it for these older formats. It's still going to see demand for EDH. Without the $50 price tag, it's not nearly as difficult to, pull the trigger and pick up an Uro now compared to what it was, months ago. So overall, it makes a lot more sense. So
glad I could somewhat make a believer out of you then.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been sitting on my one Uro forever, and I wrestle with the decision to sell it or keep it every day. Every day.
Yeah.
My card, another strictly EDH cornerstone for those who like Tribal, and this is Cryptic Gateway out of Onslaught. So it's a pretty unique artifact. Onslaught block didn't start out creature heavy, but it had legions inside of it, which was the all creature set. So it makes sense that you're just going to be able to shove creatures through an artifact out of Onslaught block, much like was it the Draconic Arch from Invasion.
Yeah.
So this is a card where if you take a look at the stocks graph far enough back, it had this insane spike that's just completely unsustainable. It spikes up to like $10 all of a sudden, and then drops back down, pretty understandably. And it's been on a slow float up for the last couple of months, ever so slightly on the uptick. Interestingly enough, we started to see a little bit of attribution on TCG numbers finally, where the number of LP or better copies have finally really dwindled under 100 down to about 92. And the market price has really only been about $4.15 for a couple months, plus or minus 2 cents. However, CK's buy list has done nothing but go up in the last month, and it's not going to sound like a lot, but it's gone up by about $1, and their quantity for buy has not changed. It's been like steady again, somewhere around 20 plus or minus 4. So they're bringing in and they're moving this card, and it doesn't really seem like they have a problem with it. The increase of buy list price, however, is what intrigues me if most of the stock numbers seem to be staying the same. So that means there's enough demand for it that they have to raise the buy price to bring it in. Okay.
Yep.
So EDH playability, this is where it gets a little interesting, because really, when you look at this, it tells an interesting tale. And the tale is there's a lot of slivers up here, because Cryptic Gateway is basically another sliver general. You just stuff all your slivers through Cryptic Gateway and combo out. You don't cast them, you just put them into play. So it triggers a card like Intruder Alarm that says whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you untap all your other creatures. So at the same time, you're making infinite mana with your mana slivers. Yeah, exactly. And you just 2 slivers, make another sliver, 2 slivers, make another sliver, on and on and on. Moreover, Wizards is one of the other most popular tribes, either mono blue or through something like Kanji, which is a little interesting. Kanji kind of goes both ways. Kanji is sometimes a bird angel hybrid thing. Sometimes it's just blue-white Wizards, whatever. When Wizards are represented a handful of times. And then this is the interesting one, and this is what I thought started to push the number on buy list. There's Morphon the Boundless. Now, Morphon the Boundless is actually super innocuous, and this is really why I picked this card. Morphon the Boundless is actually the front for an Elementals EDH deck. And Elementals just got Omnath.
Yep.
Which now means renewed interest. And things like Risen Reef just look at when a card enters the battlefield. So again, as you're just stuffing things through Cryptic Gateway, you're going to be triggering Risen Reef. Elementals are in blue. That allows you to do things with Intruder Alarm and other various combo cards there. It's anything that kind of involves base blue is extremely powerful with this card. It also dumps Big Dumb Dragons into play.
Which is great.
Yes. Karthus is up there.
Let's drive the market.
Yes. Karthus is up there. That's why. So we're seeing renewed interest in this card because we just get Omnath a bunch more elementals over the last year. It just kind of like beefs up that tribe. And you can also do some shenanigans. Mistform Ultimus is on this, and there's a Shapeshifter deck that just kind of twists its way into everything. So that goes in elementals. It's ridiculous. Rats too. Cool. Rats, whatever.
They're fun.
They are. My expectation for this card was that it was going to take a lot longer for buy list numbers to go up without seeing an increase in market price overall. So I rewrote my timeline on this for, like 5 or 6 times. And at the end of the day, I think Cryptic Gateway right now is going to see a longer lull than most other cards after Zendikar, people are buying back into EDH staples. So now's the right time to get in. And between now and the first set of 2021, we have Commander Legends and Jumpstart Backstock coming in, both of which have the ability to add more to these tribes or new tribes in general. Well, we know what's in Jumpstart, right? Jumpstart is adding stuff to these tribes.
Yeah. Well, and we also have RTRTZ, where Team Edward versus Team Jacob.
So my timeline ends there. I have more to go.
Okay.
So between now and the first set of 2021, that Norse Viking set, whatever it is, this is where I expect the Cryptic Gateway, the buy-in time to really be, and we're not going to see a huge uptick in this card because people will slowly be buying in. I think somewhere around Strixhaven, the Wizard set, is where if this card is going to skyrocket, that's where it's going to happen, because that is going to give the Wizard tribe, which is represented here, Both, like I said, Mono Blue, Kanji, which is blue-white, and Nalia, which is Grixis, all here for Wizards, right? This is Azami, is on here. These are all popular. So between Legends, Jumpstart, and Strixhaven, if we get excellent tribal support in Legends and Strixhaven, Strixhaven is where I expect this card to pop. And even then, this is where I think you're going to be able to get out at a decent amount to buy list if you buy in now. I did think about going back to Innistrad for the Vampire Werewolf set. And there is a werewolf theme right now floating around for this, but it's strictly Gruul. And the only legend you have for that currently is Ulrich from Eldritch Moon, the terrible flip general for this. And people were very upset the first time around. I do expect WotC to, put their hands up and mea culpa for that in the next one.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, Ulrich costs 5. I don't see a werewolf theme requiring something like Cryptic Gateway to really take advantage of synergies. I think it's just going to hard cast its stuff normally, a little bit of ramp. Not to say it wouldn't fit in there, I just don't think it's going to be that big a driver. Similarly with vampires, they generally top out pretty low. We're talking like 5-ish usually. Baron is he 5 or 7? Either way, they don't make them like they
7.
used to anymore.
Yeah.
If we get excellent vampire support, yes, absolutely. I think it comes through.
Yeah.
I think, but somewhere around that D&D set, so after Strixheim around D&D is probably where this card is going to pop, if it will pop. So that is like 6 months out, I think.
Yeah.
That's like April-ish, yeah. That is where I really expect this card to kind of flourish. But now is the window to buy in. Now is when you should be looking towards this. The only thing that could change this and push up this timeline is if any of the Sliver generals that aren't Queen are reprinted in Commander Legends. There's a chance that brings renewed interest to the tribe. The best general for that deck, fight me, you'll lose, is Overlord. And that card is not that pricey. It's about 17 for the set. Normally, it's been reprinted a few times. If they reprint Sliver Coat of Arms. Do you remember the name?
Yeah. Legion.
Yeah, if they reprint Sliver Legion, the second most expensive Sliver in the deck, that can push people back into the Sliver tribe, and that will pop this card. I can almost guarantee you that'll pop this card. So keep your eyes out for that. Look at Cryptic Gateway. I think this is a card that it's right now $4. If it hits $10 in 6 months, I think that's sustainable. If it hits it prior to that because we get great slivers in Legends, I think $10 is also sustainable. I don't think we're going to see a reprint on this card because it's a weird effect where you just stuff things through a gate.
Yeah.
They don't make them like this anymore. So it's not going to get the Slate of Ancestry treatment and get a standard reprint.
Oh, God.
And
I forgot about that.
It looks terrible with the 9th Ed border or whatever it is. It's absolutely, it's atrocious. But
it's so bad.
Cryptic Gateway is a sleeper card for now. I do expect it to pop. And with the great tribal opportunities we have coming up, this is where I expect it to just go and never come back. 6 months. So
yeah,
that's it for me on picks.
I think it's a solid one. I also think your timeline's really good, and reprint risk-wise, you're pretty much looking at Commander Legends. I could maybe see it thematically in Return to Zendikar, but it doesn't really make sense to me because, like you said, this isn't the type of effect they like for Standard.
No.
It's just not. So.
Exactly. Yeah, they don't want... They got rid of Elvish Piper. That's no longer a Standard card. That's too good, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And if that's the case, then, well, all right. They're not doing something like this. There's just no way.
Yes, exactly. So, yep.
Yeah.
So, Slate of Ancestry. If you don't play it and you play a tribal deck that isn't like something weird, and you don't need it in Elves, like, look into this card.
Yeah.
It's a beaut. It's a gem. I love
great.
it. But I think it's going to be it for us this week, everybody. We will catch you next week with something to talk about that isn't Pioneer, probably EDH, because why not?
Yeah. That's the way it goes now.
But for MTG Cabal Cast, I am at Halt I am Reptar on Twitter, and you are
At Thirsty Sizzler.
We'll see you guys next week.
See ya.